Welcome to This Week in Money. I'm Jim Goddard. Today, CIBC Wood Gundy investment advisor Ross Clark will take an extensive look at the equity markets and tells us what's performing and what sectors have been a disappointment. Christine Duhaime from the Vancouver law firm DuhaimeLaw.com tells us how extensive money laundering has been in BC. We ask, have the BC and Canadian governments done a lot to prevent illicit money from entering our marketplace, and the role of cyber currency in the bad money game. Christine also tells us the BC and Canadian governments have showed little support for Vancouver's innovative high-tech industry. Plus, at the end of today's program, we'll have a company showcase update with Lotus Ventures' Dale McClanaghan. We'll talk to Ross Clark right after this.
Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and the Yukon. Trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the pink symbol ABN-AF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
Welcome to This Week in Money, the source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Ross Clark. He's an investment advisor at CIBC Wood Gundy in Vancouver. Welcome back to This Week in Money, Ross.
Nice to be with you, Jim.
Interest rates. Everybody's scared they're going to be going up. Are they going to go up?
Well, it's interesting. Everybody gets out of sync with these things. Interest rates basically bottomed last summer. And we had the beginning of a rise going into the fall, and then when the U.S. election came along and Trump got in power, there was that thought that, boy, rates are really now going to start going up. We're going to have a reflation. And yes, interest rates did move up, but only until the middle of December. And then they started to go sideways. And as a matter of fact, in the last 8 or 9 weeks here, we've had one of the best bond rallies we've had in ages. As a matter of fact, the last few weeks here has been the biggest rally we've had since the early part of last year. And, with that's over on the Treasury side. When we take a look at the U.S. long bonds, those 10 or 30-year bonds, I mean, that's clearly where you get the bulk of the action anytime when you're looking at bonds. And, rates last year went from lows of maybe 134-ish, and they were up to 2.25 by December, then backed off, and now we've had another run here. But, we always like to keep an eye on the credit markets because they're 10 times the size of the equity markets. They're always watching the Dow and the S&P for some insights. But if you really have to start, as Bob would always say, watch your credit markets, look at the yield curve, and look at the credit spreads, the difference between the high yield market and the Treasury curve, and watch to see when things are starting to change. And what we're seeing in this last few weeks is that as we've had the rally in the government side, which would basically be sort of a safe haven move, you've seen the high yield products not have the same move at all. And as the spread between the two has started to roll over, we've taken out a support level this week. Now, it's a minor one, but it's usually a precursor to a rolling top in terms of the equity markets. So we're going to be watching these credit markets very closely. And if the curve, the difference between the 2-year bond in the U.S. and the 10 and 20 years starts to move back through the 140 level, we're up at around, if it moves through 170, and we're at about 140 right now. If it starts to move up through there, then that would really be a pretty major signal as far as equities are concerned.
So this rally in the bond market, what's that going to lead to?
Well, with the type of strength that we've seen here, it really, you take a look for what markets will react, what equity markets get the benefit of this move in interest rates. And since the U.S. election, when we saw that rise in rates, the one area that does extremely well with rising rates are the life insurance companies, because they've got these long-term commitments, obligations to pay out. And so when rates are low, and you remember that they have also constraints on what they're allowed to own. They can't go out and buy items that have too much risk in them. So when the government bond market starts to have higher rates, as it did following the election, you get a nice move in terms of the life cos. When we had that move in the bonds, that with yields going up to 2.25%, the life cos rallied by 15 to 20% into December. And then as rates eased off a little bit, so have the life insurance companies. And then because this bond market rally in this last 8-9 weeks has gotten to a point of being overbought, when we look back, we can see that overbought readings here in bonds become optimum lows for the life cos. So when we look at the big U.S. ones and the 3 big ones here in Canada, they've all sold off very, very nicely since the early part of the year. And those would be that would be a sector that clearly the investors should be taking a look at. They might have some price appreciation, plus they've got decent dividends.
Gold and silver. Bob Hoye, who we talk to frequently, told us that the gold-silver ratio is telling him that the equity markets are in danger of rolling over.
Yeah, and this is all part of that haven idea in terms of money moving into bonds, moving in terms of U.S. dollars, and in terms of the gold market. And with the gold-silver ratio, would you come out of these significant lows in terms of the ratio and in terms of the gold market, quite often that becomes a high as far as the equities are concerned. And it's part of more of a rolling pattern top that we'd be looking for more than anything else. But, we always talk about gold, and it's the 8-year cycle that I keep in mind here. And of note, this 4 out of the last 5 times that we've come out of this 8-year cycle, the gold market has been the one that has had the steady, methodical move up. And then it's been in the latter part of the move in the last, out of an 8-year cycle. So you might have 3 to 6 years that are the upside mode. And it's usually that last year and a half where the silver really comes to life there. And what we've been seeing last year at this time, it was silver that led, and we got a very, very buoyant market there. And then we got the hard sell-off. Well, this year's rally has been more of a gold move. And with that, I think it's got much more longevity to it than one we saw last year. This could be more of a steady, methodical move like you saw in the early 1970s. Or even in the market coming off the 2000 bottom, it was gold that really was the participant there. And if we take a look at the other side of the coin, it was the equity markets that were underperforming during that period. And you would expect that the miners at this point will probably take a second seat to what's happening as far as the metals themselves are concerned, and that's what we've been seeing recently. The GDX and the Hoye have been underperforming on the rallies. I think you'll continue to see that for an extended period of time here. And for the gold market, as we say, you let the market, once it's in a trend, if it's an uptrend, the key thing is now where are the supports? As long as it just keeps grinding its way higher, stepping its way up, and it doesn't give back enough to break one of those supports, and right now that's at 1245 from our calculations, then you just stay with the trend until it becomes excessive. And usually it takes a weekly RSI reading up into the 70s before you'll get your next really big correction, and that could be 6 months to a year from now.
My question was going to be, what's a better bet, gold miners or bullion? Do you bail on the miners right now, use that to buy bullion, and then wait for the share prices to come down and then buy more of that?
Yeah, well, that's the inclination that I have at this point, that if you're going to have an equity market that's that's going to be on the heavy side, and we're getting into that time of year where the surprises tend to be the downside in equities rather than to the upside. You don't have to have a bear market in that odd 6 months of the year where that May through October window where the markets historically don't do as well as the other 6 months of the year. But we are in that point where if the equities do take hard breaks at a point here through the summer, the miners tend to get caught up in that as well. So my preference would be to be more with the bullion side of the trade, unless you get some good oversold readings in the mining stocks. Now, the other thing we've had here is this time of conflict. We think back 2 weeks ago, the Americans sent the missiles into Syria, and you got an immediate reaction in the gold market. Then last weekend, there was all the anxiety over a nuclear test with the North Koreans. So we didn't get a nuclear test, but we got a failed missile from there. And usually what will happen at those times of conflict, and I've written up a piece on that over the years, and we continue to bring it out and dust off the cobwebs, but classically, those times of anxiety are when you will see the peaks in the metals prices, and then you want to have a nice, good correction or sell-off that gives you an oversold reading, which then becomes your opportunity to go in and buy the mining stocks. And that could take a few months. So I think patience as far as looking to be a buyer of the miners, that's a pretty important factor right now.
We're chatting with Ross Clark. He's an investment advisor at CIBC Wood Gundy, Vancouver. Oil prices down below $50. Are we going to see a continuing drop in oil?
Well, the work that we've been doing had suggested that. As a matter of fact, when we had that initial break from 53 or 55 down to 47, the initial bounce we thought would probably peak out around 50, but it had more legs in it than that. We did get up, and there's various things that we look at in terms of where turns should happen in the marketplace. And one of the characteristics we look at is what's called a sequential pattern. It's when we get 9 consecutive bars with the price moving above 4 bars earlier. So a little bit of fancy technical work there. The reality or the bottom line of that is that 10 days ago, the oil market and the CRB index both registered 9 readings. So that meant that the rally was getting long in the tooth. And historically, what happens in the oil market and in the CRB is that it will roll over within the next week or so. And that's exactly what we've seen. So this week, we rolled through 50, off of 53. We gained some momentum towards the tail end of the week, now down into the 49s. And if it breaks through the $47 low that was put in place here a few weeks ago, I think you'd start to look once again at the lower numbers that we had in mind, around $41 to $42. I think that's a fairly reasonable target. It could end up being significantly worse if this market starts to just feed upon itself, but I think that's a reasonable target for now, and we can see that the oil stocks, if you take a look at the XLE on the U.S. or the XEG and the Canadian on the ETFs, they've been weak. They didn't participate very well at all in this recent rally back to 53. Nothing like they had when we were up at 55. So I think the oil stocks have already been a leader to the downside in telling us that there's some lower numbers to come.
Ross, how come in Canada, when the price of oil goes down, we end up paying more at the pump?
Well, we have to realize that the prices that we're talking about are international prices. They are U.S. dollars. And so if you've got a lower price of oil happening, at the same time we've got a petrocurrency up here in Canada, invariably what will happen is that the decline in our currency because of the declining oil prices will just take away all of the benefits that we would have expected from the low oil price itself. Now, if you're on the lower side of the 49th parallel, a lower oil price is definitely going to have an impact and help you out on your gas prices. But I'm sorry, for Canadians, it just doesn't work that well.
Ross, thank you so much for being on This Week in Money.
Always nice to be with you, Jim.
My guest has been Ross Clark. He's an investment advisor at CIBC Wood Gundy, Vancouver. Coming up, Christine Duhaime, next on This Week in Money.
Always consult your investment professional before making any investment decision.
Lotus Ventures, Inc. is a BC-based medical marijuana company poised to launch into the rapidly evolving cannabis sector. Lotus is in the final review stage of the Health Canada approvals to become a licensed producer, having arranged facility financing of up to $12 million, plus building permits for its prototype indoor production facility. Shares trade under the symbol J on the Canadian Securities Exchange. Visit our website at lotusventures.ca.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
This Week in Money is archived online at talkdigitalnetwork.com.
My guest is Christine Duhaime. She's a lawyer with Duhaime Law in Vancouver. Online, you can find her at duhaimelaw.com. Christine, welcome to This Week in Money.
Thank you so much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Christine, can you tell us a little bit about your law firm?
Sure. Well, we do general corporate law, but we also have a specialized practice area in financial crime that we've had since I set up. And the idea behind that is to provide advice, specialized advice on things like anti-money laundering, counter-terrorist financing, sanctions avoidance from countries that we're not allowed to deal with, and things like tax evasion, because it's a fairly specialized area. And I started out on it, I guess, about 10 years ago in the casino industry. So, it's kind of what I wanted to do in a practical law, so we created that as a practice area at our firm. And I think there aren't that many firms in Canada that do that, so we're quite fortunate to like the work we do and to be doing it as well.
Is it quite the little niche where a lot of people aren't even aware about money laundering and all the rules that go around it or associated with it?
Yeah, exactly. It's very true. So when I say I started on the casino industry, there are all sorts of different sectors that have to report, and banks being the primary one, and they've, been aware of their responsibilities for a long time. But, we're in Vancouver, and one of the reporting groups that has always had to report in money laundering special transactions and keep records and have compliance officers are realtors. And for many, many years, realtors were aware of their responsibilities, but I can't honestly say complied with them very much. And now that's really turned around considering the hot market of real estate in Vancouver. And now that group has, understands there is a thing called money laundering law and that they have to comply with it.
A recent international report named the 4 top places in the world for money laundering. Canada was number 4, the U.S. number 1. Is there pressure in Canada now to enforce money laundering laws, and who's responsible for that enforcement?
So there's 2 types of pressure happening in Canada. One is external from places like China. Huge pressure from the U.S. always has been to enforce our laws generally, our criminal laws, our drug laws, our anti-money laundering laws, our terrorist financing laws. So huge pressure from U.S. law enforcement and U.S. government for us to be compliant with global laws. Also pressure from the Financial Action Task Force, which is the body in Paris that actually designs anti-money laundering laws and gets countries around the world to implement the exact same laws so there's consistency around the world. So there's enormous pressure on Canada externally to be compliant with anti-money laundering law. Within Canada, though, there is pressure from the public, from Joe Average, from me, from you, from people that are being affected by non-compliance because it affects us in terms of taxes. We pay more taxes because money launderers don't pay their taxes from tax evasion. Someone has to pay for public sector services. So all of us on Joe Average, I call us middle class, we'll call it what you will. There's enormous and growing pressure from us for the government to take money laundering seriously and enforce it. Where there is a gap, though, that I've always seen for quite a number of years is the people that are responsible for enforcing the policy people, not so much FinTech, but the people that decide how much money the police agencies get, which is the federal government, decide how to allocate prosecution, whether or not we're going to go after money launderers or not, whether we're going to give them a pass or that type of thing. So the federal government generally, except for FinTrack, there seems to be no change ever that happens at that level in terms of whether they care or not about money laundering and our reputation outside of Canada. And to answer your question about who enforces it, it's mixed. When it comes to just regular compliance, like whether a bank is reporting suspicious transactions and how the compliance officer and whether realtors are, that is something that FinTrack looks at as to whether or not reporting entities are reporting to it. And it does compliance reviews and can fine reporting entities like the Manulife, for example. It will fine a bank for non-compliance. And then there are police agencies that if they get cases referred to them by FinTrack, which they often do, they go to the prosecution service and make a recommendation for prosecution. And usually the prosecution service decides in umpteen cases not to proceed with it. They're of the view that money laundering offenses are too complicated to prosecute, even though they're lawyers and you would think that would be easy. But in any event, so it seems to break down in terms of enforcement on the prosecution side.
Are money laundering cases too difficult to prosecute?
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, just generally speaking, if you are a tax evader, you don't pay taxes, you work at a bar, let's say, and let's say you earn $80,000 a year, all cash tips, no one knows about it, you walk home every night from the bar with it. You're not paying taxes, you're not reporting it, that's money laundering because you have proceeds of a crime, the crime being that you didn't report your taxes and pay it. And so, like, that's a super easy case. Obviously, you made the money, it gets put in your bank account, there's a transactional record of it, you're living way above your, $10 an hour that the government thinks you earn at this job, you're, flying all over the world, staying in expensive hotels, own a house, your job doesn't match your level of spending. So those are really easy cases to prosecute. Even the much more complicated ones where you're dealing with financial crime involving organized crime, always there's a financial transaction record, there's bank accounts, there's things the reason why we report to FinTrack and the reason why FinTrack reports to the RCMP in terms of a case ready for prosecution is because they just all day monitor financial transactions and they see patterns and they see who bought a house, where it went, like they've got everyone's financial records. So with a push of a button, they can show, in the last 3 years where you sent all your money to. But if you're thinking about everybody in the world that wires money in and out of Canada, that's a lot of intelligence. So we have the financial records, we have the data. It is not complicated. The U.S. prosecutes all the time in the exact same way where they get financial transactions, they build a case, they prosecute. I think what happens in Canada is we plead down or plead out because we're afraid of, I don't know what it is, of defense lawyers, mounting a defense, but that's just part of the game. I think we need to just prosecute more, and so be it if they have a good defense lawyer. Like, we'll eventually increase our conviction rate and send a message that money laundering is not acceptable.
Is the BC government complicit in money laundering because to take part in the weekly limit for BC lotteries to gamble online, they'll pay out up to $9,999 because you have to report transactions over 10,000 or more?
No, I don't know. What the interesting thing about the BCLC is before they were required, which just as a recent thing, to report online. So online gaming was exempt from reporting to FinTrack. While it was exempt and there was no obligation to report that, the BCLC voluntarily disclosed to FinTrack nonetheless all of their online transactions. So I don't think it's accurate to say that the BCLC structured something on purpose. What they did do is during the time when it wasn't required to report, because it wasn't even voluntary, there was just no obligation whatsoever, they themselves made a limit to cut down on things like, when do I report, why do I report, but this was not a time in the law when they were required to report. So I think that's not a fair assessment for the casino industry, online anyway. But if you look at the fact that the other online scenario, though, is there are huge amounts of companies outside of Canada that provide online gaming services to Canadians that are not legal. They don't pay any taxes. They take lots of money from Canadians. They help in things like making sure, the gambling addiction rates are really high. And they don't report to FinTrack because they're outside of the country, because they operate illegally, and they certainly don't pay taxes. So I think in the whole picture of online gaming, the BCLC looks pretty good compared to the outside exterior companies targeting Canadians.
Who has fiduciary duty to make sure that money that's used in real estate is not being used for money laundering?
I would say that's the realtors. I mean, when you mention the word fiduciary obligations, a realtor is an agent of a buyer or a seller, so they have obligations to their buyer or seller, for one thing, but they also have responsibilities under the legislation to make sure that they know their client, to make sure that their client isn't a terrorist, for example, to make sure that their client isn't laundering money, and to ask certain questions to make sure that they understand where the money is coming from and what it's going to be used for. And so there's a breakdown in terms of the real estate sector where when you talk to any realtor, and I often do, and some of the things we need to do are things like, no Canadian can take money from a terrorist. You can't take money from a sanctioned country. Those are just things that apply across the board that are part of our anti-money laundering law. And when you ask them, have you checked your client, against a terrorist list? They just look at you blankly like, what's a terrorist list? Where do I find it? And so if they're not doing that basic due diligence of knowing your client and who are they, they're certainly not doing the rest, which is where's the money coming from? Are we sure it's not proceeds of crime? If your customer is buying a house for $10 million, do they have a job that supports the fact that they're buying a house for $10 million and they're not asking sort of the normal questions you would ask to make sure that the money they have that they're buying a house with is consistent with their job, their history of employment, where they come from, what they've done, just those basic types of things. And the reason why those questions are important is because they are obliged to make sure that they are not facilitating money laundering and to be asking questions to identify suspicious transactions. And if they're not asking the questions, they're never going to be able to identify transactions that are suspicious. Have
people from mainland China been buying high-end real estate in Vancouver and Toronto?
Absolutely. And I think we went through a bunch of years where you asked for our provincial government earlier. I think, if our provincial government can be faulted, it's the fact that they, for many years, I think, were saying there's no foreign buyers in Vancouver. Well, yes, there were. And they were buying sometimes houses with proceeds of corruption, sometimes proceeds of crime. And we don't know for sure if that's happening in Toronto, but there's no reason to suspect that Toronto is any different than Seattle, any different than Miami, any different than New York, any different than Vancouver when it comes to people from mainland China coming to buy high-end real estate, often with proceeds of corruption.
Due to currency restrictions on moving large amounts of money out of China, do the purchases of high-end real estate in Canada by people from the mainland involve money laundering?
Yeah, usually by definition, and it's because there is a $50,000 U.S. limit on moving money out of China. So when they're faced with that, a Chinese foreign national moving money out of China can do one of two things. They can go to their federal government or their bank regulator and say, I'm getting divorced in Canada. My bill is $500,000. I have a legitimate reason for moving money out. Please authorize it. They never do that. The reason they never do that is they never want the government in China to know how much money they have and how they got it. So the next option for them to move money out is to do it in a way that is not honest. And the way that they do it that is not honest is they line up, 1 to 200 people, give them each $50,000 US to go wire money for them. And so each of those 50 people, let's say that they line up, have to lie and fill out a false form that gets filed with the central bank to say that they own $50,000 US and they are wiring it to Canada for whatever purpose they list down that is not true because it's not their money, and that they're going to be using it themselves in Canada. So they go through this huge organized system of getting people to lie to move money out of the country illegally in violation of China's banking laws in order to move money to Canada. So when you say that whether or not it involves money laundering, that is not a legal way to move money out of China to circumvent the banking regulations. And the issue of what happens when it comes to Canada, because sometimes the banks turn a blind eye to that, our criminal code in Canada says that no person, no company, no bank, no money services business, no law firm, no anybody can accept, transfer, deal with, arrange or facilitate any money coming from another country if we're aware that it involves some sort of criminality. So every time that we agree to take money in from China and accept, 300 wires of $50,000 each, like as if a bank doesn't know what that is, all going into one bank account, we're not allowed to, criminal code prohibits anybody, any entity from accepting and facilitating that type of money coming into the country if we know it's tied to an offense that would be an offense here. So unfortunately what has happened is there's a market for real estate in places like Vancouver and Toronto. There's a market for facilitating money coming in from mainland China. We've all turned a really blind eye on asking any questions about What happens if the money comes from another country? We don't really want to know. We won't really ask those questions. We'll just deal with whether a criminal offense has occurred in Canada. But when you take that money, a criminal offense has occurred in Canada. And a lot of arguments I've heard from banks have been, well, we don't really care about what happens in another country because the law doesn't require us to ask questions about that. But that's not true. If you look at sort of terrorist financing, of course the law requires that we ask questions. Otherwise, we would be saying, hey, we don't care if money's coming in from ISIS. We'll take it because we don't care about what happens outside the borders of Canada, provided they don't commit a criminal offense here. So the argument that it doesn't matter about the cleanliness or the dirtiness of money outside of Canada is bogus. We really need to be asking questions about where that money comes from and making sure that it's legit.
We'll have more with Christine Duhaime when This Week in Money returns.
I'm Bill McWilliam, president of Cascadero Copper, CCD on the TSX Venture Exchange. Cesium is one of the world's rarest metals with a growing industrial demand. Drilling is underway on our Tehran property in Argentina to prove up a cesium resource. Cascadero's patent-pending leach process has the potential to make Cascadero the lowest cost supplier of cesium in the world. Visit our website, cascadero.com, or phone us at 604-924-5504.
GEM International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond producing country in Africa, located next to the fourth largest producing diamond mine in the world. International Spotlight is on an 1109 carat diamond recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior with a proven operator and finance team. GEM International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
This Week in Money is archived online at talkdigitalnetwork.com.
Welcome back to This Week in Money. I'm Jim Goddard. We're speaking with Christine Duhaime, a Vancouver lawyer who specializes in money laundering issues. Is there cooperation to combat money laundering between the governments of China and Canada, and what could be the ramifications?
We probably don't know if there's cooperation. There has not been in the past. So what has happened is China is very, very anxious to get what it views as billions of dollars out of Canada back to China that it thinks was stolen from its country, the people of China, in addition to the government of China. So there's enormous pressure on China for Canada to give back some money. So to the extent that there's cooperation, we really haven't seen any. Like what we've seen is some lawsuits, like the one that we did to get money, money that paid back, but we haven't seen the government of Canada doing anything to go after the exact same people. Like there were lists of people that the government of China has that they know where they live and how much money is missing and why the money is owed and to whom. We haven't seen our government taking any steps to, on the public sector, prosecute them and have those people returned to China and for the return of the money, which is crucial.
If a few people from mainland China are charged with money laundering in Vancouver real estate, are other people from mainland China that have bought real estate in Vancouver likely to sell and move their money out of Canada?
I think so. There are stories already that people are looking more towards Seattle and more towards the United States and in Toronto. And part of the reason why they're looking outside of Vancouver is because they're concerned with things like the case we did, concerned with the fact that China's focused on Vancouver. And so, if you have money that you've taken out of China illegally that's owed in a debt or that's owed to the government, you're going to want to move to a place where they're not paying so much attention. And China's paying a lot of attention to Vancouver. So for sure, it is causing people to move elsewhere to buy homes. And it's also causing, not everybody's a money launderer, obviously, from China, and not all money that gets put into real estate is process of crime. And the unfortunate thing that happens is that because our government isn't doing very much about it is that it's painting this brush that, when Chinese foreign nationals are here with expensive homes or luxury cars, they think we all think they're money launderers and they haven't earned their money legitimately. And they don't like that. So, one of the disadvantages of not cracking down on it and not doing anything is it paints a broad brush that's probably not fair on everyone in the real estate sector. So an argument for actually taking it seriously and maybe cracking down on the public sector level would be just to go after those people that do have process of crime and, reduce the stigma that everybody in real estate, if they're from China, that, there might be something suspect about their money here.
When foreign buyers sell a property in Canada, are there potential tax liabilities to the Canadian Revenue Agency?
It depends if they have one, it depends if it's their main house or extra house, and it depends on whether they live here or not. It's all tied to their residency. But and if it's an investment property, and if that property has been bought through a corporate vehicle or not. So it all depends on how they purchase the house and, how they're getting out of it and how many other houses they have.
Who's responsible for collecting taxes payable in Canada from the sale of real estate by foreign owners?
Well, that would be CRA that would be responsible for collecting, and provincial governments as well. And normally when a real estate deal gets closed, often the law firms collect on behalf of a transaction to make sure that it's payable to CRA until the taxes go through. But in terms of ultimate collection, it would be CRA.
Were people borrowing money from banks in China and then borrowing additional funds from Canadian banks to buy Vancouver real estate?
Yes and no. So what happens is people borrow money from banks in China, often with no intention of paying it back. So they will take a number of loans out, have a business in China that looks like it can support a number of loans, let's say it's $20 million. They will then move to Vancouver as part of a very long-term scheme with $20 million in their bank account, come to Vancouver, buy a bunch of houses, and then borrow from Canadian banks to buy real estate. So they're double borrowing, but they have no intention of going back to China and no intention of paying back those loans. The problem that happens when they come here is they have $20 million, they don't have a company, there's nothing to support the fact that they could possibly have $20 million other than they tell Canadian banks that they had a company in China, they sold the shares, that's how come they got instantly rich, and then they buy real estate here and they mortgage it, and the banks are willing to lend them money based on the amount of money that they got from China, and unbeknownst to the banks here, they don't understand that they just took money from China and have relocated here and have huge outstanding loans in China that a bank in China is never going to be able to collect. And it's really unfortunate because the banks are all one big banking group, and I don't think a Canadian bank would lend to a customer knowing that another bank in another country was owed so much money. Like, they wouldn't facilitate that type of transaction, but they just don't know because of the language difficulties and because there's no connections between the banks.
Is one way around the BC foreign buyers tax for the lower mainland of Vancouver to borrow your money, say from a bank in mainland China, and then not pay that loan back, so they foreclose and take over the property, knowing that was the scheme from the start?
Yeah, I think that it is possible to do that. I mean, I do know that there's all sorts of different vehicles and a lot of thought process going into how to buy homes here, so that, like, if you think about some money that has come to Vancouver that is process of crime or corruption from bank loans or from government payments made under the table, they don't want that money to be repatriated back to China, so they come up with umpteen schemes to make sure that it's not easy even to detect. So while you may be able to detect that the person's here in Vancouver, you're going to have a hard time finding out where the money is. And so in order to do that, they do all sorts of schemes that are usually corporate schemes so that you can't find out who the shareholders and officers are. And even if you can, it's usually an entity held in the name of, a girlfriend or a number of girlfriends or somebody that you can't easily connect to them. So it's historic money laundering systems that they use and historic ways of money laundering, and which are difficult to track down. But yeah, all sorts of ways are used for sure. Is
that a way of saying that the Greater Vancouver property tax on foreign buyers then is very easy to beat, or it is beatable in the first place?
I think both. I think what it did is it made an impact in the news, and so without reading the details, I think it was a bit of a deterrent. And so from that perspective, I think it was good in the sense that it sent a message about buying real estate in Vancouver. And so that chilled the market a little bit, it seemed to do anyways. So I think that more than anything, it sent a bit of a message out. Whether it's going to be a long-term or not, I think we'll have to wait and see.
Is there significant mortgage fraud in the Vancouver real estate market?
When it comes to Chinese foreign nationals, in a narrow way, yes. And I can give you like an example of some things that I've read about that happened. So, for example, a person who is one of the people that has borrowed money from a bank in China, let's say when they move here, they will then go borrow money from a number of banks here, buy a number of houses, and register the mortgage in their name. So let's say in your name, you're going to register the mortgage in your name. Unbeknownst to the bank, though, they will set up a trust at a law firm, and they will sign over all the interest in that trust to someone else, maybe into a corporation. And the reason there's mortgage fraud with that is they haven't told the bank that the house is really beneficially owned by a trust, or by these other shareholders if it's a company, or by these other people who are the trustees. So they're signing a mortgage, they're assuming responsibility for it, They're committing mortgage fraud in the sense that they're violating the Bank Act because they're not completing honestly who the mortgagee is going to be for those properties. The bank has no idea. The bank's going to, so what happens is the bank reports to Fintech when you're talking about money laundering, who bought the house, how much money, if it's a suspicious transaction or whatever it happens to be, they report as they're required to do, but they're reporting all the wrong people because the person whose name is on title is not then, and who files the provincial sales form as to who bought the house, is not the beneficial owner because they've set up a secret trust in which they've assigned all the interest in the house to this trust. So in that way, that is mortgage fraud, bank fraud, you name it, lots of fraud happening on all sorts of levels because of the, falsification of documents of who the real title holder is in that real estate. And it happens quite a bit. So it's not just one house, it's many houses, many families do this, many people. It seems to be kind of the way that they're unfortunately advised that real estate transactions can happen. And the banks, for their part, are not doing enough of a due diligence to ask questions like, is there a trust, is there a company, and then to require the homeowner to not be able to transfer a property to a trust.
Are Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies money, and are they here to stay?
They're here to stay, I think, for sure. Whether or not they're money depends upon what jurisdiction. Like, different countries have approached it differently and decided it's money and it's not, or it's money for tax purposes, but it's not money for Securities Act purposes. So there's been lots of divergence in views on whether or not it's money, but it is certainly money-like in the sense that you can buy anything and sell anything and exchange your money for Bitcoin, like US dollars, for example. So it definitely is a money alternative, and it is here to stay for sure. I don't think it's going to go anywhere, but it'll morph into something different. I think we'll see different types of digital currencies. It's probably not Bitcoin in the long term.
Were and are cryptocurrencies being used by people from mainland China to move money into Canada?
Yes. Law enforcement has said that for a very long time. In fact, most Bitcoin is purchased by Chinese foreign nationals in China. People report all the time that huge amounts get sold out. So they're bought a lot in China and huge amounts get sold out in Canada. The difficulty with that is there's no tracing and there's no reporting of the fact that you moved money from China to Canada and you imported it with no trace whatsoever. You could likewise move it from China to the Cayman Islands and retire as a billionaire and no one would know where that money went. So it is definitely used for those types of purposes. There was a story out of the U.S. the other day that with the fentanyl crisis that Canada is one of the suppliers to the U.S., unfortunately, and a lot of that, the fentanyl comes in from China and it's being bought for with Bitcoin. So people in Vancouver and Toronto are ordering fentanyl from China in kilos, buying it with Bitcoin. It's being cashed out in China, and then when they get it, they're selling it across the border to the United States, again, Bitcoin. So there are nefarious uses for Bitcoin, and unfortunately, it hurts us here in Vancouver, especially because we have a fentanyl crisis going on that unfortunately is tied to Bitcoin, and it is tied to Bitcoin because who the wallet holders are in Bitcoin, those people that hold the money in their wallet, that's still very much anonymous, and it's difficult to know who those wallet holders are.
Are cryptocurrencies the preferred method of money movement for money launderers and organized crime?
Hard to say, but definitely used. There are, dark net websites where you can they shut a bunch of them down, Silk Road 1 and Silk Road 2. There's a whole lot of new ones up, and there's a whole subculture in the dark net where you can use Bitcoin to buy things like guns and ammunition and whatever type of drugs you want. You can order a hit on somebody. You can, anything you can't normally buy legally, you can buy on the dark net. And the payment of choice is always Bitcoin. And it's always Bitcoin because it is the most difficult, except for cash, it is the most difficult to trace, and cash doesn't work when it's international transactions, but Bitcoin certainly does.
Are tax havens a thing of the past?
No, I don't think so. I think we talk a lot about it. I think we're nowhere near close to the point where people are going to stop using tax havens, and it's because we're nowhere near to the point where, in order to break down a tax haven, like British Columbia is a pretty good tax haven, although I think we accidentally became one. But in order to break down something like a place like Vancouver becoming a tax haven, we would need to have something called beneficial ownership registries, where whoever owns a company, all of their shareholders are public and accessibly public. So right now we have a share registry system in British Columbia where you can set up a company and anyone can go online and see who the directors are, but you certainly can't see who the shareholders are. That information is locked in a law firm and you're never going to find out. But there's a movement globally to make sure that when we set up companies all around the world, we also have public registries of who the shareholders are. And things like if you pledge away shares or sell some shares on a security agreement or as part of a loan or part of a venture capital deal, that whoever those shares are allocated to during the course of a debt agreement or wherever it happens to be, that too becomes a public part of the public registry, so that if someone lent me $100,000 to do a fintech startup, on the public registry you can see that I don't really hold 100% of my shares anymore, I just hold 20%, and 80% is held by this person. And in order to make tax havens a thing of the past, we would have to, on a global basis or country by country, decide we want to have open registries of shareholders, and no country that I know of has yet moved to do that.
We'll have more with Vancouver lawyer Christine Duhaime coming up on This Week in Money.
I'm Douglas Mason, President and CEO of Rainy Mountain Royalty Corp., RMO on the TSX Venture Exchange. Rainy Mountain's Brunswick property is located in the Rideout Shear Zone in Ontario. With grab samples running as high as 32 grams per ton gold, a drill program will commence this spring to test the numerous targets located by recent groundwork. For more information, visit our website, rmroyalty.com.
This Week in Money is archived online at talkdigitalnetwork.com.
Welcome back to This Week in Money. I'm Jim Goddard. We're speaking with Christine Duhaime, a Vancouver lawyer who specializes in money laundering issues. Mentions have been made about the Trudeau Foundation and pay-for-play politics. If this connection is true, is it illegal in Canada?
I don't think so. I think one of the interesting things about the Trudeau Foundation and all of that is, an awful lot of money seems to be going to McGill University. And, awful lot never makes its way out to UBC. I don't know that it's so much illegal, other than that one would hope that the process was transparent, as in, maybe all foundations in Canada were offered a chance for some funding, and whoever had the best idea, the best whatever, got it. We don't subscribe to those rules in Canada, and it's unfortunate that we don't. And in terms of pay-for-play politics, I don't think it's illegal, but I think it leaves everyone with a bad taste. I think that as Canadians, I would hope that we all believe that whether or not I have a chance to meet Justin Trudeau, or whether or not I have a chance to lobby him, because he said a lot of these people paid to lobby, in contravention of the Lobbyist Act, but whether or not I have 5 minutes of time with him and whether or not I get to pitch for something good for Vancouver shouldn't be dependent upon me writing a check for $1,500. I would like to think that we think Canada stands for something different than that.
You were recently in Toronto for a conference on artificial intelligence and quantum computing. What did you find out?
Oh, yeah, that was pretty cool. We put that conference on, and it was super sold out. It was a really great event. So one of the things I learned on the quantum computing was that Vancouver has a company called D-Wave, and they were one of our keynote speakers. And I didn't know Vancouver is, a global leader in quantum computing. And when you talk about the Liberal government here, what it does and doesn't do, boy, it sure does not do very much to promote our tech talent and how amazing we are on things like artificial intelligence. But we are, the leaders in quantum computing, little Vancouver. This company is the leader. It supplies quantum computing to NASA, to Google, to Los Alamos lab down in the United States that invented the nuclear bomb, hydrogen bomb. So really, really cool stuff, really amazing people. I also learned a lot of things about kind of how our world is going to change with artificial intelligence. Everyone agrees by now that over 50% of us are going to be losing our jobs, mostly in the low-skill sector to middle-class sector. And so what it's going to mean is that people that are highly skilled in technology, that are computer scientists, that have a specialized skill, will be really employable, very wealthy. Their skills are going to be in high demand. Not so much for 50 to 60% of us, so it's going to cause huge mass unemployment. And one of the things the government is not doing, unfortunately, is looking at how to balance that, how to make sure that instead of jobs just going to Montreal and Toronto on AI, we give those jobs to people across the country in Canada. We give an equal amount of jobs to Vancouver. We support Vancouver's AI ecosystem, and we make sure that we are ready for the next generation of super educated people. so that as we have unemployment, we also here, particularly in Vancouver, have an equal amount of employed people to keep the economy going, because we're all going to be, all of our jobs are going to change by robotics and automation really, really fast, and we're not having the dialogue we need to be having on how to make sure that Canada survives this and Canada has enough jobs and enough qualified people, and then even within Canada, make sure that the wealth is equally spread throughout the whole country.
Well, right now,
right
now they're talking about spending billions to build pipelines. Should that money be going into things like artificial intelligence and quantum research?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I've heard that the Premier, twice has said she's doing an innovation study, an innovation this and innovation that. And, Ottawa, meanwhile, has given away something like $600 or $700 million just in the last year to Montreal and Toronto, which is why I mentioned those two centers. But Vancouver leads the country in startups, leads the country in per capita, leads the country in how much money our startups get invested, much more than any other place in the country. The value of our startups is much more than any other place in the country. Like, we have phenomenal technology talent, and yet we don't have a provincial government that mentions the word artificial intelligence, that cares about it, that even knows what our startups are doing, that is even ready to go on a plane and ask Ottawa for our share of that $700 million to make sure that we are equivalently capable of staying up to pace with artificial intelligence. So, yeah, I think we're investing in things like natural resources, but my big concern is what's going to happen is we're going to end up with a country where British Columbia stands for, lumber, Calgary stands for oil, and Montreal stands for AI, let's say, and Toronto stands for financial services. And we're going to have a really divided country where we're not going to be good at everything like we need to be, and especially British Columbia is going to pay the price because we're not going to have artificial intelligence on our agenda, and we're going to be far behind by the time we realize how important this is.
Well, they always say it's a mistake to mix the words government and intelligence in the same sentence. Christine,
I'm hopeful.
Christine, thank you so much for chatting with us.
You're very welcome. Anytime.
My guest has been Christine Duhaime. She's a Vancouver lawyer. Her website, duhaimelaw.com. And that wraps up our show for this week. We'd like to thank our guests, Ross Clark and Christine Duhaime, and thank you for listening. Coming up right after this show will be a company showcase update with Lotus Ventures' Dale McClanaghan. If you have any questions for the show, you can email us at info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. We'll be back next week with more This Week in Money.
Comments made on This Week in Money are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any manner whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Archived online at talkdigitalnetwork.com. This Week in Money is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated. Executive producer is Tom Allen. Welcome to Company Showcase, an advertising feature on HoweStreet.com.
I'm your host, Jim Goddard. We're speaking with Dale McClanaghan. He's the CEO of Lotus Ventures. Welcome to the show, Dale.
Hi there.
Dale, can you tell us a little bit about Lotus Ventures?
Yes, Lotus Ventures is a medical marijuana company. We're located here in British Columbia, and we're applicants to become licensed producers.
And is that going to be for medical marijuana or recreational marijuana?
Well, initially it'll be medical marijuana. The standards and the regulatory framework will be the same for recreational marijuana when it becomes legal in 2018. But it's the same regulatory protocol, and what we're looking forward to is receiving our license to produce, finalizing our financing, and getting our facility up and running.
How long is it going to take to get Health Canada approval?
We've been in the process, like a very large number of LP applicants, for about 18 months, 2 years now. But along with the announcement last week of the legalization terms, we've also been told that Health Canada is going to add additional resources and personnel to getting more licensed production in place.
Yes, they're going to really have to improve the way they do things. It's been so slow up till now, but like most government things, it takes them a while to get it done right. Are you actually pleased that they're taking their time to get everything set up?
There's been a very logical process around the whole cannabis industry over the last, frankly, 3 or 4 years. And up until this point, it's essentially been Cannabis 1.0, with Health Canada setting up a very thorough consumer protection and security system, and have worked through the production issues with the initial applicants. It's now about 40 producers. And I think what's going to happen next is the next generation, Cannabis 2.0, of producers like us that have probably more sophisticated professionals involved, a real capital base, and an expertise who will let us grow quickly to fill this, what's going to be a very large market.
What kind of effort has gone into setting up Lotus Ventures? It's pretty complicated. It's not like just growing a couple of roses.
Yeah, I think that the group of us that have been together organizing this come out of other industries, and we sort of recognized it as a commercialization venture opened up by government regulation, frankly. And the artisan or the home grower that was under the previous medical marijuana rules, frankly, were often doing a good job, but it's very hard to scale that up. And as a commercial venture, I think that we bring the resources to be able to reliably grow good quality product that tests well, that meets the regulatory needs, that provides for consumer protections around product recalls and standardization of reliable reporting on the actual product itself. The thing that we see moving forward is resolution of making the entire marijuana and cannabis sector regulated, reliable, and that'll give governments more confidence that they can restrict marijuana from getting to young people, which is a major public policy goal, while providing adults with a reasonable choice of product and safety.
What kind of financial efforts have you put into the company so far?
To date, we've raised about $1 million in capital. We trade on the Canadian Stock Exchange under the symbol J. And Lotus Ventures is also finalized a firm contract for an additional $12 million of financing for facility construction. So to date, we've probably spent in the range of $500,000 on licensing and securing our land and initial designs.
Now, some people have suggested who needs to go and buy marijuana. Legally, you're allowed to grow some plants. Why do you think for some people or a lot of people that's not a good idea?
Well, I think it's similar to, frankly, wine making. And anybody can make wine at home, and many do. But the quality and the convenience, it's much easier to go out and get a product which is predictable, standardized, you know what you're going to receive, and convenient. And I think that there'll be folks who elect under the new legislation to grow their own, and that's a legitimate choice. But I think if you're purchasing a product in the marketplace, you should have the kind of consumer protections that we're used to in any other product.
There's some debate about branding the product once it goes commercial. How important is that to Canadian producers?
I think that there should be a degree of branding available. When one looks at what's available in the medical marijuana, there are 30 or 40 common strains, and there are much difference between one and another for therapeutic benefits as well as for recreational benefits. And I think that branding will be part of almost a consumer education element of this. Again, people understanding what it is going to be more of a relaxant maybe, and I think there'll be a lot of what looks like recreational use being for medical purposes, and I think that traditionally what's happened here in the last 10 years is there's a lot of purported medical use, which has frankly been recreational.
When it comes to branding, I'm sure there's some confusion about sorting out different varieties and their effects and who grew it. That would be almost like going into the liquor store and just saying, well, I'd like some beer. Well, there's 16 different varieties of beer, but you don't know who made them. It just says this is a malt liquor, this one's a lager, and so on.
Absolutely. And when I think about the initial legalization in Canada for medical purposes, the government of Canada appointed a single producer. I believe they were in Saskatchewan, and they were growing in a mine of all places where they could control all the elements. And frankly, they had a very poor quality product. And that was a philosophy that this was a generic product, and it demonstrated very low knowledge level about cannabis and the varieties and applicability of it for medical and recreational needs. In fact, Canada is a place which has had a huge amount of scientific research on the therapeutic values of medical marijuana, a place where they've decoded the cannabis genome and have a thorough understanding of a variety of strains and things. And I think that from a big picture perspective, Canada's got a lot of expertise in this sector, and it will come a time when we'll export that knowledge and probably export our product.
Will there be a big difference between medicinal marijuana and recreational marijuana?
No, I don't think so. I think that the types of strains that consumers go with for one versus another will probably differ. So call it a difference in product mix, but product standards, reliability, and safety, which is a central part of the Health Canada's mandate, will be the same.
I've noticed in both the provincial and federal budgets, they've made no mention of potential revenue from marijuana, which, if you look at the states, they're reporting that they're collecting more than double what they expected. Can Canada expect the same, and why hasn't the government projected revenues?
I think the government's first goal is we need to remember that they're legalizing to better restrict and regulate. They're not legalizing to promote it. And there's particularly high awareness that marijuana use by young people is ill-advised and can cause some harm. Overall, the notion of the prohibition of cannabis has demonstrated social harms that far exceed individual problems, and we're still aware that there are problematic circumstances for people overusing cannabis. And what we're seeing is, first, the government wants to establish a market share through legitimate channels that offer the product safety and also is being restricted to adults. I think the second step on the taxation side there'll probably be an increase in that aspect later, like an excise tax. But even capturing just PST and GST is going to be a very significant contributor to coffers.
Is this going to help law enforcement because you won't have organized crime, at least up front, trying to grow this product anymore?
I think so. I think that the way the sector evolved, largely by the way the courts were treating medical marijuana side, is it became a very high margin, low risk enterprise for organized crime, and then vertically integrated from growing to distribution to, frankly, retail. And there's the proceeds of that was going to finance other criminal activities, and of course escaping taxation and the rest, and creating, probably not as much harm to users other than the fact of contamination and other product quality questions, but causing more community harm through the other criminal activities.
Dale, can you again just give us a brief sketch of Lotus Ventures, where it's traded, and how people can contact the company?
Yeah, Lotus Ventures. We're traded on the Canadian Stock Exchange under the symbol J, and they can contact us at our website, lotusventures.ca, and we'd certainly welcome a phone call. You can call me at 604-644-9844 anytime.
Dale, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you, Jim.
We've been speaking with Dale McClanaghan, CEO of Lotus Ventures. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on Company Showcase are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any manner whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Archived online at howstreet.com. Company Showcase is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.